Beverly has her Bachelor of Science in Family Studies from the Corbin University. She has her Master of Arts in Counseling at Multnomah University. Beverly is a member of the AACC, American Association of Christian Counselors. It is my honor today to introduce to you Beverly Hutchman. What about the politeness and the civility? The concept of politeness and civility, being nice, being obedient, is so frequently seen as a vulnerable weakness to the people that would take advantage.
Yes.
And tell the parents out there how that's applicable and how destructive that is.
Exactly. Because what we do is we want our children to look good, so it's like we want them to always act nice and say nice things, and they have to be polite. And so when somebody does do something bad, instead of the child saying, no, that's wrong, I'm not going to do that, right? The child's like, oh, you know, I guess I better be nice, and they just get embarrassed. And people that are grooming children, you know, they'll embarrass them like over and over again to wear down their defenses until they just take advantage of them. And our kids are not strong enough to stand up to them because we've taught them to be polite. Well, we're really bad about that in America.
The concept of being nice is then forced upon the child as don't make any waves.
Right.
Hasn't got anything to do with nice. It means don't make any waves.
Yeah. Yeah, it does.
And not making waves is more important than how you feel. And what does that do to the child's value?
I know.
It says you
because they're not important.
That's exactly what
you're not important. Do as you're told.
Exactly.
And so then they get molested, and they really believe that they are nothing, and they're not as good as other people, and something's wrong with them.
And they're victimized by the molester that reinforces that.
Yeah.
And then they wonder why the kids grow up with an extreme lack of self-esteem and don't know what happened.
And why do we have so many people trying to numb themselves with drugs and alcohol and sex?
And sex.
And gambling.
And anything except taking a look at their life and finding the talent, the ability, and the joy of what they really naturally are and could be.
Yes.
Beverly, I would appreciate it if you would explain to us about the concept of daydreaming. I know that you worked in dangerous places with high security prisoners that were molesters and very dangerous people.
Maximum security, high risk, yes.
You spoke about the concept of daydreaming before offending. Would you tell us how that was applicable?
Every offender that I talked to said that was a huge part of it, that they daydreamed. And it started really early. They said they couldn't stress that enough, that it starts very early in their lives after being exposed to sex early, and they start the daydreaming process.
So daydreaming actually became a psychological and emotional tool to build up their sixth skill.
Right, because they actually play out every possible scenario. What if this happens? What if that happens? And they know how they're going to react ahead of time, and they know exactly what they're going to do. And it's called a script, actually. That's the technical term for it. And so when they actually carry out their crime, they carry out the script, and the script is pretty much always the same, which actually is kind of a good thing because it helps to catch them.
In other words, they have a particular MO.
Oh yeah, they're preferential. They like this particular thing, and that's what they do when they get that victim every time.
We have some statistics that came in, and we actually were asked to present them to you.
Okay.
And we're presenting these statistics to you because we would like you to go over them and tell us what you think about these statistics and whether or not you think that they are valid and why and how they're applicable to the subject that we are presenting to the public tonight. So here they are.
Well, offenders who actually killed their victims. And as we know, most of those who kill their victims are the inadequate or the morally indiscriminate offenders. So these are the ones that actually killed their child victims, and it says here that 88% grew up in a Christian household, and 72% considered themselves to still be Christian. Most of them lived with both biological parents growing up and had parents that were not employed, so they had at-home mothers. Okay?
Do you think this is an accurate statistic?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Mm-hmm.
How does this happen?
I know, because you think, oh, well, if both parents are home and they don't get divorced, right, and they grow up in these Christian homes, how did we get this killer? Well, this would be a morally indiscriminate offender. And the reason that I say that is because this is not a person that feels inadequate. This is a person who feels entitled. This is a person who grew up in a very oppressive, authoritarian household, Christian household. Okay? So we've got a very domineering father who probably doesn't treat the children and his wife very well, and they're not quite human, and he's all important, and they're not, and he rules the house. Now, I'm not saying all Christian households are like this at all. You know, I'm a Christian. I'm just saying some are.
So you're saying this particular type of a household produces a particular type of a problem, whether it's Christian or not, and in this case it happens to be.
Right. And so when you look at the homicidal triad, okay, so which is fire starting, animal abuse, and bedwetting, right? And they say, well, if the person has 2 of these things or 3 of these things, then they may be a killer. Those are the makings of a killer often, right? Well, maybe, maybe not. I mean, you do see a lot of killers with those traits and a lot of people that are antisocial for certain. But animal abuse, only 20% of the people in this study had animal abuse in their history, and far more of them grew up in religious households and Christian households, to be specific. So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, okay, so how could this happen? Well, if they grew up in a household where human rights were not respected, where there was entitlement, where women and children were not as important as other people. You see? Because children learn what they are taught, what they see, with that in the household that they learn in. And that is how this could happen.
Isn't it also true that, as far as entitlement is concerned, that the amount of abuse is always in direct proportion to the distance between the empowered and the unempowered?
Oh, yeah.
So when you have homes of extreme empowerment for one sex or one person and extreme disempowerment for another, the statistical abuse is in direct proportion.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, and these are people that actually killed their victims. And so when we look at the homicidal triad or this, and we look at this and it says, well, 20% of them had animal abuse in their history. Well, animal abuse does not cause a person to become homicidal. Okay? Although people that like to kill animals like to kill sometimes.
Right.
Okay? So when we say that, 88% grew up in Christian households, and that's a way higher number. Well, obviously growing up in a Christian household with both parents is not going to cause you to become a killer.
Right.
Right? So what does? Well, what does is what does in any family. And that is learning disrespect and seeing other people as less human and feeling entitled to do whatever you want.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the entitlement itself then becomes a danger point.
Mm-hmm.
Entitlement goes from narcissistic into sociopathic then.
Oh, yeah. That's why so many people that are sociopathic are narcissistic. They just go hand in hand. Now, that doesn't mean that a narcissistic person is necessarily a psychopath.
Right.
But most psychopaths are narcissistic.
Yes.
So they're comorbid. So,
yes. Yes. Well, thank you. Do we have any other statistic there that was on this page?
Let's see. The average child sex offender is in his late 20s, and the average one is a male, and they're white. Okay. Yeah, and actually, most of them are not married, but or actually 40% of them are. The ones that actually molest the most are more educated and have a higher socioeconomic status, better looking, fit in better, right?
Wow.
But the ones that are the more dangerous as far as hurting people usually are less educated. Now, these are just
general.
Yeah.
They're not guided will answer, they're general
yes,
counter
yes,
answer.
yes.
Yeah.
But they are usually less educated, don't have as much money, and are not as social. The ones that tend to kill, but they harm less children.
Wow.
Right.
This should really help people to be on the lookout and to know what to look for. We cannot change what we do not acknowledge, and we cannot acknowledge what we do not see.
Right.
And it's time to see, and to see clearly, and stop pretending that this is not happening.
That's right, and to be able to recognize that someone that you probably really like could be a sex offender. Doesn't mean they're not, just because you really like them and they're super nice and charming.
Right.
Often they are very nice, or it wouldn't work. And we need to stop stereotyping all sex offenders as dirty old men, homeless people, you see?
Yeah, because it isn't true.
Right.
Not at all.
And some of them are, but yeah, right. It's not true, but the ones that offend most people are not. They're right there in the upper economic, yeah. Well, I wanted to mention that 90,000 cases of sex abuse are reported every year in America. 90,000, and that's just the ones that are reported. And that 96% of those are committed by people who know the victim. So, that's quite a few. So a lot of people tend to think that it's the fathers abusing kids, and sometimes they do, but only 20% of them are fathers abusing their children. And 4% are stranger victimizations. So it's just different than most people think. Most people tend to think of the guy waiting in the bushes or whatever, the dirty old man comes by in a van and grabs the little girl, and that does happen, but those are really rare cases. And then after that, we've got our government, and what you learn in school typically is always pointing fingers at family and saying it's the family members that are abusing the children, and they do, but that's the vast majority are acquaintances. 4% are being abused by strangers. 96% are by someone they know, who is not a family member.
Right. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
High statistics.
Very high, and people aren't looking there. And so I think we really need to be aware who are sex offenders. And certainly those other kinds of sex offenders exist, but we need to be aware that the vast majority of sex crimes happen from people that we know.
Of all walks of life and all income brackets.
Yes. As a matter of fact, more sex crimes by far are committed by upper socioeconomic people and higher educated people. Now, these are not violent crimes. They're not. But they offend huge amounts of children. They just have to have sexual contact with children, and that is why those particular offenders tend to slip up and make some mistakes, even though they're very good at it, and that's how you catch them, because they have to have it. They have to be with kids.
So define the kind of mistakes they make. What's their modus operandi?
Well, for instance, getting maybe a new videotape of them with a kid or something like that. And there was actually an incident like that. And the teacher, who was the sex offender, just had to look at it right then in a classroom and got caught. Stupid mistakes.
Unbelievable.
But they offend tons and tons of kids. I mean, by far.
You say that they're not violent crimes, but still they are crimes because they mess these kids up psychologically and emotionally.
In a way, it's almost like the difference between verbal abuse and physical abuse. I mean, kind of. It's just an example. The verbal abuse, there's no marks, there's no proof. It's very, very confusing. The person often feels it's their fault and they're to blame, but they don't have any real proof that anything's happening, and other people are always like, saying of the abuser, oh, this person's such a wonderful person, you're so lucky to have them in your life, not knowing what goes on behind closed doors. Where, well, I think that explains it pretty good.
It does. Do you have anything you'd like to add to this? The education in the public that's listening?
I do, because I wanted to mention how can we tell, what are the signs when a child has been abused sexually?
That would be very helpful to know.
Right, and what can we do?
And when you tell us the signs, would you tell us like the mathematical proportion of them? In other words, what I'm saying is, if something happens, does it happen often or all the time? When a child has a significant sign, is it constant or not? How do you know?
I'll do my best to do that.
All right.
Because there's quite a list of symptoms. Pretty much all children that have been sexually abused have nightmares. I mean, the vast majority do have nightmares. A lot of spider nightmares, but they have, nightmares of the abuse too. They also experience enuresis and encapresis, and that would be, say, for a child that had already been contingent, they weren't wetting the bed anymore, they weren't wetting their pants, and all of a sudden they're wetting themselves again, you see, or wetting the bed again. That means something's going on. And so it may not be sexual, but the vast majority of children who are sexually abused do that. They wet the bed and they poop. They'll poop their pants and things like that. And so, and after they've been contingent and they start doing stuff like that, it's really cause for concern.
Wow. Right.
And then also acting out sexually. Like, let's say you have a little child that really hasn't had much exposure to sex, and all of a sudden they're very sexualized and kind of precocious in a sexual way, and making lots of sexual comments, sexual drawings, things like that, then you have to wonder. Right?
Right.
And so in older children, which actually teenagers are abused more than small children, I have statistics right here on ages of children that are abused, which are really surprising, because most people, when they think of child sex offenders, they think of little kids, little innocent children that are perfectly innocent and evil perpetrators, right?
Right.
Okay, but the reality looks a lot different than that. 67% of children that are offended against are under the age of 18, and for the purposes of this talk, as I think I mentioned before, we're going to consider a child anyone under 18. So 67% are under 18, 34% are under age 12, okay, and 14% are under age 6. So our teenagers are really at risk. So what we've got is teenagers who usually aren't that innocent. They get in trouble and they do things they shouldn't, and they can be taken advantage of simply because teenagers are risk takers and because they're at that age, and sex offenders know that, and they're very sexually reactive, right? So I think we really need to pay more attention to our teenagers and protect them. As we were talking about what to look for if your child's been abused. So if you've got an older child, and the vast majority are teenagers, right?
Yeah.
You're going to be looking for something different. They will start being more promiscuous. In older children plus younger children, you'll see anger and depression. But with your older children, you're going to start seeing things like drug and alcohol use. And definitely becoming more promiscuous and difficult. They may be very moody, argumentative. And you might think, oh, they're just a teenager. Don't do that. Of course, all kids are not going to, just because they're moody and they're getting into drugs and alcohol and they're getting into sexual activity, that doesn't mean they were sexually abused.
Right.
But we need to pay attention.
Because the statistics are so high.
Because the statistics are so high, and because parents totally don't pay attention to their teenagers, a lot of them. They just think, oh, they're teenagers, they don't want anything to do with me, they're supposed to be out doing da-da-da-da-da. And bad things are happening to our kids. And I think that parents, if they really made a safe environment where their kids could talk to them about things, might be surprised how many of these kids have actually gotten in over their heads sexually. Because the acquaintance molesters are very clever, and they seduce these children. And they work on it real hard, kind of like dating. They buy them gifts, they compliment them, they meet all their emotional needs. And then they get them to do some bad things and keep secrets, and then the child isn't equipped to deal with that, and they're stuck.
Wow, this is really good information. I hope that it educates a lot of people.
And I hope so, too. And when I was saying, I wanted to mention, what can we do? What can we do to protect our neighborhoods and our children? Because these are our children, which is supposed to be like the most important thing in the world to us, right? But they're also the future of the world. So it's even bigger than that. It goes way out there. So not only do we want to pay attention and listen and talk to our kids and make a safe environment to where they can talk and we're not going to go, oh, come on, or, where we actually really care and listen, and they will come to us. But we also want to raise our children with kindness and consideration and be loving parents, because in studies that show sexual murderers, people that murder their victims, every single one of them show in common that there was no kindness and no close-knit emotional connection at home.
That's frightening.
Yeah.
They're not capable of expressing kindness because they've never had it. They
Exactly.
don't have it within them to give because they've never had it.
Right. And how do people learn? First they watch mommy do it, and then they try it with mommy or whatever, and then they try it on their own with mommy looking, and then they do it by themselves. Right? Or usually we do that. We learn from our parents. We do what they do.
They do what they know, what they've lived.
Right. Right.
Parents should really pay attention to that. What are you teaching your children besides being yelled at?
Now, I don't know that I should have said mommy, because it could be mommy and daddy or whatever, but we want our kids to have a safe zone to come home to. Exactly. And we want them to know that wherever they are, wherever we are, we're there for them. We're going to listen, and we're not going to say, just shut them down because it might be embarrassing or something like that.
I think that's one of our huge problems. We don't want to deal with any inconvenient truths.
Mm-hmm.
And we do shut people off because we don't want to deal with something that's very hard to deal with. And besides, what will people think? It's easier to turn the child off than to face the adult.
Right, and what if the neighbors find out? Exactly. My child had a problem. Oh, no.
Which is really sad, because who's the child going to go to? Who's going to defend them? Who's going to protect them if not their parent?
Right.
And how isolating and frightening that can be for that child.
Exactly. But I think if it came out in the open and we stopped keeping the secret that this is happening, if people know the truth about who sex offenders are, they come in all different shapes and sizes, and who commits the most crimes, and different stuff like that, and we educate our kids and we're open about it, we don't have it hiding in a dark closet somewhere, it loses its power because we know.
That's true. It's the ignorance and the refusal to acknowledge what's happening that causes us to be unable to change it. You can't change something you won't recognize and acknowledge.
Exactly.
You cannot, yeah.
But as I said before, people tend to pretend it doesn't exist and hope it'll go away. And what's happening is it's getting way worse.
It really is. Thank you so much for educating people today. I'm sure you've done a lot of good with this. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Rebecca.
You're welcome. It's sad. I want to personally thank everyone in our audience that sent questions in for me to present to Beverly. We thank her very much for answering these and for being a part on our program. And we thank you all for wanting to hear her and wanting this education that is so needed in our country. Beverly, thank you so much for being a part of our program. It's really delightful to have you here.
I really hope people listen. We have got to pay attention. We have got to come together on this and stop being afraid to talk about it. And to be honest. We need to be honest. We need to allow our children to be honest.
Yes, we really do.
And to make that safe.
We hope this information has helped you and helped to protect your children and make your life better. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
No, but like certain
Yes, he is.
Yeah, dude.
Come on here. I know how to build them all.